Hello everyone, welcome to this YouTube channel again. Today let's continue with our Python series. We've been exploring the Python documentation. Today we'll look at the range function. So let's say you need to iterate over a sequence of numbers. The built-in function, which is range, which you'll see in a moment, comes in handy. And so I'll create a file here. I'll call this range class range or range tutorial. Okay. Now, so let's say you want to generate some sequence of numbers. You can do something like this for I in range 5, 5 for instance, and then you say print I. So with this, what happens is that these numbers get generated starting at 0. So you have 5 numbers that are generated for you. I'll run this and let's see what we have here as an output. You can see it starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the given endpoint is never part of the generated sequence, and you should take note of that. So if I say range 5, 5 doesn't get printed out for me. If I say range 10, for instance, you know where that is going to end. If I, for instance, change this from 5 to 10, we'll start at 0 all the way through to 9. It's not going to include 10. But by the time you count the values from 0 to 9, you have 10 values. So this is the number of values you want to generate, or the number of values of sequence of numbers you want to iterate over. It's possible for you to let the range start at a different number. So let's say, for instance, we want to print out, let me just comment this out. So let's say, for instance, you want to print out numbers ranging from 5 to 9. So how do we do that? We can say, let me just make this into a list. Let's call this, let's just print it out straight. We can print out, and I hope this is not going to be confusing to you, but essentially what we are doing here is instead of me having to declare a variable, I'm just printing it out directly. So if we try to run this, you can see we have a list of numbers generated for us. And if you look at this, we have 5 starting at 5 all the way to, but not again including that 10. So if you wanted to include 10, you can either do something like this where you have 11. So that includes 10 now, as you see here. Another thing you can do is to specify a different number of increment. So if you notice this, you see that this sequence is just 1, 1 we have as the incremental value. So you had 1 to 5, you have 6 plus 1, 7 plus 1, 8 plus 1, and so on and so forth. But you can change that here. So the way to do that would be to do something like, let me comment this out. You can do something like print list range. So let's say 0, we want to print all the way to, but not including 10. And we want the step to be 3. So what this is saying is that start at 0 and then all the way to, but not including 10. And we want the difference between sequence to be 3. So let's see what we get as the output. You have 0 plus 3 gives us 3 plus 3 gives us 6 plus 3 gives us 9. And so for each iteration, it adds 3 to it. Now, it's also possible for us to have negative values. We can specify negative steps. So the way we do that is by doing something like this. List range, we can say negative 10 to negative 100, and the step is negative 30. So if we print this, it's going to start at negative 10, walk up the way through to negative 100, but not including negative 100 again. And then the incremental step is going to be negative 30. So let's print this out and let's see what happens. So the first is negative 10, and then the next is negative 10 plus negative 30. And that's negative 10 minus negative 30, and that gives us negative 40. And just as you see here, negative 40 plus negative 30 gives us negative 70. And so this is something you can do here. Now, one more thing you can also do is you can iterate over indices, over the indices of a sequence. And you can do this by combining range and len function. I believe we've looked at the length function for finding what the length is. So to do that, let's say we have a list. This is Mary. This is hard. This is A. This is Lidl. And this is lamb. So Mary had a little lamb. So let's say we want to iterate over the indices. And by the indices, if you've watched the list video, you should know what indices means by now. So we can say for I in range length of that list. And what do we want to do there? And I'm going to explain this in just a moment. We want to print I, but we also want to print AI, just to indicate that we want to print the particular element there. So if we run this now, which I will explain in just a moment, as you can see, we have 0, Mary, 1, hard, 2. You get the point. But what's happening here is that we get the length of this list. The length of this list returns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the length of this string. Now it gets passed in here. So you think of this like range 5. That's essentially what this means, because this gets the value of this is 5. And so we have range 5. And that's why if you look at this place, you can see that we don't have 5 here, but we have 4, right? And so we have that I, which iterates. Of course, if you still recall, when we printed this I the other time here, we had 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's this one, right? So you think of this statement here, like for I in range this. So essentially, this is what this gets translated into, this whole thing. And so when you come here now, we're now saying print I, which of course is the index. So the index at here is 0. The index at this point is 1. The index at this point is 2. So if you recall, when we treated list, we said the way to get the actual value is by doing something like this. So you use this particular name, and then with square brackets with the index in between. And so that's why we had this value here. But in most cases, this kind of thing, it's going to be convenient to use the enumerate function. And we'll take a look at that sometime later. Now let's look at one of the strange things about range. If you print out range 10, for instance, let's see what we get. We just get this range 0, 10, right? And I'm going to do one more. Print this out. We get 10, 3. And so that was why the other time we had to include 0 here, just to indicate that we mean start at 0, continue, walk up to the way, all through the way to 10, at the step of 3. But this is not what I want to show you here. So if you look at when we printed this, when we printed range 10, our output was this. Now you would expect that this is not the output, right? You would expect it to print out the entire the entire value, right? Now, in many ways, the object returned by this range behaves as if it is a list, but in fact, it's not a list. It's just an object that returns the successive items of the desired sequence when you iterate over it. But it doesn't really make the list. So what you're seeing, it doesn't create that list. The advantage of that is that it saves you some space, some extra space that you would have incurred creating a list. And so this kind of object are the things we say are iterable. And what that means is that it's suitable as a target for functions and constructs that expect something from which they can obtain successive items until that particular supply is exhausted. And I'll explain this in just a moment. An example of the kind of function that takes an iterable is sum. So say, for instance, we want to sum the numbers from 0 to 3. What we can do is we can pass in sum and say range 4. Now recall again, I said 0 to 3, which means that we're not including this particular 4, right? It's 0 to 3. So if we run this, let's see what we have. Now again, I forgot to include print there, and that's why we had nothing. Okay, so let's see what we have if we run this. We have 6. Later, we'll see more functions that return iterables and take iterables as arguments. And see you in the next one, where we talk about the break and continue statements. And we also look at the else clauses on loops. See you then. Bye.